have been wondering what this draped device was here. This is the Xbox. And so, for the first time, let me now unveil Xbox.
Microsoft is on the verge of a new console release, and no, it's not a jump into next generation. Instead, what we have here is a supercharged mid-cycle refresh known as the Xbox One X. With its release, the X cements itself as the new top-shelf option in the Xbox family, and console gaming as a whole. More importantly, the X is aimed at the console gamer who seeks a no-compromise and true 4K gaming experience, but that comes at a luxury that's almost double the price of its existing One S sibling and doesn't really check that many more boxes. So who is the Xbox One X for? Hopefully this review will help you figure that out. Like any purchasing decisions, to understand where you're going, it's good to know where you've been. In the case of Microsoft and the Xbox brand, we need to go back about 17 years to the unveiling of the original Xbox. Back then, Microsoft CEO Bill Gates stood on stage at CES to show off the cutting-edge nature of their first entry into the console market with the Xbox. The original Xbox was the first console to ship with a hard disk drive, was powered by Intel and NVIDIA, and ready for the upcoming standard of HDTV resolutions. It was a forward-thinking piece of hardware that was all about horsepower and what it brought to the table for game developers. Fast forward to 2005 when Microsoft had a follow-up on the horizon, the Xbox 360. This would become the company's most successful console to date. It transformed what we came to expect from a console as an all-encompassing entertainment platform, seamlessly merging different forms of entertainment, being Netflix, YouTube, and everything in between. That's not to say the 360 didn't have its own struggles. Like any jump in technology, the device also hit bumps along the way. For instance, the Red Ring of Death, or does anybody remember that horrible HD DVD add-on? Needless to say, it wasn't enough to dethrone it as the primary gaming device for most people during that console generation. Microsoft and the Xbox team were willing to take risks towards a vision in hopes that they'd be taking over the primary HDMI port on the most important screen in your house. The Xbox One X is the culmination of the vision. But what is that vision? In many ways, it is the decisive belief that raw processing power and high-end specs will dictate the future of gaming. By now, whether you're a core gamer or not, you've probably heard about the Xbox One X and how Microsoft is touting it as the world's most powerful console, with a heavy emphasis on true 4K gaming. The brand new device from Microsoft touts 6 teraflops of computing power, a whopping 128 gigabytes of GDDR5 RAM, and it's coming in at a speed of 326 gigabits per second. While size doesn't matter to everyone, the Xbox One X also happens to be the smallest console Microsoft has ever made. The Xbox One S that came before it is 40% smaller than the VCR-like monstrosity of the original Xbox One that shipped in 2013, and the X fits nicely within that footprint. But when you realize how much power and features are packed into its small frame, you have to admire the engineering that took place here with the Xbox One X. Everything else on the exterior, ports-wise, remains unchanged from the S model. In other words, the machine still features 3 USB ports, 1 in the front, 2 in the rear, 1 gigabit Ethernet port, 1 optical out, HDMI in, and HDMI out to your TV. The fact that they're able to space out those components and still fit them within the case is impressive. For those that don't know, the X isn't the console maker's first foray into 4K. That honor belongs to the Xbox One S, which introduced 4K Blu-ray playback, as well as upscaling for certain titles. Microsoft is introducing true native 4K gaming to the mainstream audience with the One X, and this places them in a familiar spot, once again at the forefront of a new format, just like the adoption of HD TVs that took place 17 years ago. With Xbox One X, the team at Microsoft is going to market and brand titles for the system with 3 distinctive icons: 4K Ultra HD, HDR, and Xbox One X Enhanced. Games that offer 4K Ultra HD will mean that the title features a 4K frame buffer, whether it's native 4K or using some kind of 4K rendering technique like checkerboard rendering or dynamic resolution. Any titles featuring this insignia will push the resolution to 2160p if your display can support it. Meanwhile, in the 2017 gaming scene, HDR is pretty self-explanatory. Games with this icon on the box will support the HDR10 standard when enabled. This feature, even more so than resolution, I think is the key differentiator visually for most games. HDR provides a wider color palette, provides colors you just never seen before. However, this feature is not exclusive to the X. Gamers who enjoy Xbox One S will also benefit from HDR games, and it should be mentioned that it's also supported by the basic PS4 and PS4 Pro. The number of enhanced games for Xbox One X, both older and upcoming, is currently sitting at 150 titles. For those counting, that is at least equal, if not more, than the current list of enhanced titles available for PS4 Pro. Enhancements is a general term and can mean various things for different games. Some titles may see improved load times, while others get unlocked frame rates or newly added textures. Xbox One X Enhanced is for games that have had their developers put in the extra time and effort to maximize and enhance the titles to run better on the console thanks to the improved specs. People put in work to get those 6 teraflops flopping. Big first-party titles like Forza Motorsport 7 and Gears of War 4 have these enhancements coming into play through software updates. Some third-party titles like Middle-earth: Shadow of War will feature this special treatment as well. In the specific case of Shadow of War, players can expect 4K HDR and a consistent 30 frames per second and the highest quality version available outside of a high-end PC. It's time to talk games, but before we do, let's address the 500-pound gorilla in the room, because it's poisoned video game sections everywhere. This idea that Xbox has no games. This narrative that Xbox One has no games just isn't true. Whether or not Xbox's first-party lineup is your personal cup of tea is something you can certainly debate, but you cannot deny that most games, which obviously include third-party titles, are more than readily available for the entire Xbox One lineup. While we all love to lord over exclusive games and what people can't play on their other plastic box, the vast majority of games coming out and selling in top chart positions are multi-platform releases, and in that respect, people shouldn't define the boxes solely by their niche market of content. Xbox isn't solely comprised of Cuphead, Halo, and Forza, just like PlayStation isn't limited to Uncharted, Persona, and Gran Turismo. Okay, now that we've got that out of the way, let's move on. As I attended game events in 2017, I made sure to ask developers if they'd be going out of their way to put in performance mode upgrades to their upcoming or existing titles. Most said, nothing to announce at this time, as to not make a commitment in one way or another. But Microsoft answered this question with the materials they sent in with the Xbox. Not only do newer titles and those committing to Xbox One updates benefit from the under-the-hood improvements, but existing games, both from this gen and backwards compatible titles, will be enhanced by the console without any additional work from the developer. I was able to see this in action when I fired up Gears of War 2 and Halo 3, which are now 9 and 10 years old respectively, and it gave me a better idea of what the added horsepower meant to the standard, non-enhanced titles. In short, the games loaded faster, there was no more notable textures popping in, and frame rates of each title were rock solid. Jumping between Gears of War 2 and Gears of War 4, I was surprised to see how consistent the overall experience was. Obviously, Gears of War 4 is running at 4K with very obvious higher quality assets, but Gears of War 2 didn't feel like a 9-year-old experience when comparing the two. Through the Xbox One X, what was once old is new again. With so much focus on the 4K buzzword, you would think that only existing 4K owners or prospective buyers would benefit from the Xbox One X. After testing it out on both, I need to issue a correction. A more accurate assessment would be that those buyers would probably benefit the most, principally because they'd also be benefiting from HDR enhancements as well. Owners of 1080p TVs, and that's the vast majority of HDTV owners out there, would benefit from the system's higher quality assets, super sampled down to their resolution. Even without the bells and whistles of 4K, I was able to test this with Gears of War 4 on a 1080p TV while swapping back and forth between the One S and the One X. And what I instantly saw was a difference in anti-aliasing, jagged edges when playing the One S. The game's characters in motion appeared to have almost like an outlined set of rigid lines. On the One X, this grid of lines was completely non-existent. Other notable standouts were environmental textures and assets. When slowing things down to look around and take in the details, you quickly realize the Xbox One X just had a softer, hazier image overall when compared to the X. After testing the 4K to 1080p super sampling, I switched on the performance mode in Gears of War 4 campaign. While it's not displaying at 4K, it still uses higher resolution textures than the vanilla version on the S. More importantly, because of the fluidity of 60 frames per second, it looks like a completely different game. In this case, playing on the Xbox One X in 1080p just felt like an overall better experience than playing on the vanilla One S. It's worth noting that this difference was much more noticeable in some games than others. A game like Gears of War 4 performed notably better than Forza Motorsport 7, simply because of the nature of the latter title. While Forza Motorsport 7 on the S offered a softer image overall, when played on the One X, you couldn't really see much of a difference because of all the motion that was going on. Unfortunately, for the purposes of this review, I could not compare recently released titles like Assassin's Creed Origins or Middle-earth: Shadow of War in a similar fashion, as their updates with the One X enhancements don't release officially until after this review goes live. However, with both of those titles getting 4K assets, I think it's safe to assume a very similar outcome to what I experienced with Gears of War 4. The Xbox One X has two key points working against it, and it places it more in a niche product category than the must-have device Microsoft is hoping for. Essentially, Microsoft is in a competition with itself due to how solid the Xbox One S is, especially at a budget price. The One X and the One S are running an identical system UI, they both support the same suite of streaming apps, they both feature 4K Blu-ray player, and they both have support for HDR10. Most importantly, for consumers, you can often find the Xbox One S for half, sometimes even less than half the price of the One X. Just to put things in perspective, the One S console I picked up for comparison in this review was only $189 at Costco, and it came with a game packed in. Then there's the dreaded FOMO factor, otherwise known as fear of missing out. This not only goes against the Xbox One X, Xbox One family of devices in general this generation. For those out of the loop, since 2013, Microsoft has been fighting an uphill battle against their PlayStation counterparts. Microsoft began this current generation with a focus on TV and the now defunct Kinect sensor, and gamers weren't having it. It's an issue that's plagued the platform since it launched in 2013, with many early adopters having moved on to the PlayStation ecosystem due to Microsoft's fumbled launch. This eventually led to PlayStation amassing a sell-through rate that's in the tens of millions of units higher than that of the Xbox One. With that grab of market share, there was a migration of players who jumped ship from Xbox Live over to the PlayStation Network. In a little over 5 years' time, I've heard the online gaming conversation shift from what's your gamer tag to what's your PSN username. During the heyday of the Xbox 360, it was assumed you were on Xbox Live, and that's just not the case anymore, as the PS4 has become the dominant console, especially for online gaming this generation. But therein lies one of the Xbox's biggest hurdles. With many gamers eating lunch with PlayStation in their ecosystem, will the One X's sheer horsepower be enough to draw back since-jaded fans? That answer will likely come with third-party and exclusive support, with Microsoft needing to take an aggressive stance against the powerhouse that is PlayStation. The Xbox One X's direct competitor is Sony's PlayStation 4 Pro, and while Sony's console can be had for about $100 less, it's missing a key component that makes it come up short of its 4K ambitions, a 4K Blu-ray drive. When you add not just the inclusion of the drive, but also 40% more overall horsepower, the Xbox One X stands alone as the king of the hill in the console spec war. It may not have some key exclusives from other platforms, but Microsoft hopes that it can make up for it by having the most popular games in the world look the very best on Xbox One X. When I outlined how I wanted to approach the end of this review, I initially wanted to divide it into different parts. One for existing Xbox players, one for new players, and one for 4K TV owners. The reality is that doesn't really work, because at the end of the day, everyone is either a current 4K TV owner or they will become one when they purchase their next TV. If you're looking to just dip your toes into the Xbox family, you're all clear to go with the One S. However, if you're a multi-platform gamer and the type of consumer who doesn't mind paying extra for a premium experience, one that will by default play better and look better, not just on the TV you currently own, but will look amazing on the next TV you purchase, the Xbox One X gets a buy recommendation from us.